that I've had to give that have caused me more anxiety than this one. Anxiety because the title of Minefield for Campus Free Expression, when it's about Israel and Gaza, is something everyone I'm going to be talking to knows all about, I assume. So what was there to say? So what I thought I would do is take a little walk through that minefield and raise a variety of issues that come up as a result of our little tour. I thought I would start with legal actions that are being taken against universities. Now, I don't know if any of you have seen advertisements for Diamond and Diamond. They are not what I would call my most esteemed legal organizations. I have been known to derisively refer to them as ambulance chasers. And they make clear how you get a free consultation and so on. Well, Diamond and Diamond have launched class action lawsuits against the universities I'm going to show you in a minute and their student associations on behalf of both current Jewish students and alumni dating back to 1998, alleging that the university have violated non-discrimination policies and failing to provide adequate staff training to handle harassment. And then they invite, in the same way they invite if you fall on the ice, they invite those who believe they have experienced anti-Semitism and meet the criteria for the class action are encouraged to contact Diamond and Diamond lawyers at 1-800-567-HURT. And these are the universities that they've launched the class action lawsuits against. I'm not sure why the suit against McMaster is $77 million, and the lawsuits against TMU, York, Queens, British Columbia, and Concordia are $15 million. But that's now when I read the statement of claim that they submitted to each of these, and it was pretty much a joke. I mean, it was very badly done. I didn't take it seriously. And then our center does a lot of interventions in courts, and we have various lawyers that I work with. And I was talking to one lawyer, not who we work with, but who had information about a case, and he said, I have to tell you at the outset of our conversation that we have a potential conflict of interest. And I wasn't worried about it because we weren't retaining it, we were just giving you some information. He said, you've probably seen the class action suit against TMU that was launched by Diamond and Diamond. And before I could say anything, and he said, it was a real joke. But let me tell you, version 2.0 of that is not going to be a joke because our law firm has been retained to carry the case forward. And then I discovered that Diamond and Diamond are just sort of fronting for this. The person who's doing this for them is a very committed Zionist who's quite committed to doing this. But it's being funded in some significant part by an outfit in the United States called the Lawfare Project, which this is just from their website. You know, they pride themselves on having taken 130 plus legal actions within the past few years to advance justice for our clients and the Jewish people. They also indicate that they have operated in 17 jurisdictions worldwide: United States, Spain, France, Canada, Italy, European Union, Belgium, etc. And that they've recruited 600 plus lawyers to work for them pro bono to handle these cases. So they're not an insignificant body. They receive some significant funding from American foundations. And they are the ones who are both the legal heft and the money behind what Diamond and Diamond are doing. And so all 6 of those universities are facing these class action suits. They received notice of them 6, 8, 9 months ago, but the next steps haven't been taken yet. As well, there are several legal actions that have been launched by students against individual universities. In the ones I've seen, they're very sophisticated material they've submitted. They have quite ardent and competent lawyers claiming that basically universities have not lived up to their policies in regard to protecting students against anti-Semitism. And this is a real problem, and part of the minefield. Real problem is when universities write policies, it's not like governments writing laws. They write the policies, they're often overly broad, they're aspirational, indicate, so at my university, there's a respectful workplace policy, which prescribes and makes you subject to discipline if you engage in violence, threats of violence, harassment, discrimination. But then they extend it on to all the way down to rudeness. Now you could charge probably 1,000 people a day. And in my university, it's 40,000 students or so with, one person or another, faculty member, with rudeness, especially how subjective that concept is. So they have these policies that are trying to state an aspiration. These lawsuits are saying, well, look, you haven't lived up to the policy. I experienced this, the university did nothing, and so forth. So it's going to be a real problem for universities defending themselves, because they're going to either have to say, well, these were aspirational, we didn't mean them literally, which is not something they want to say, or they have to say, well, we didn't live up to it, in which case they can suffer very serious penalties. A second part, another element in all this is doxing, of putting people out there, information about them, claims. And there's now been up in the upper, your upper left-hand corner is the name of the organization that does this, called Canary Mission. It's an American organization. And this is what you see on the screen is from their website. Anti-Semitism posing as academia, expose of the Institute for the Cultural Study of Zionism. That's just one of theirs. They also have a little thing about University of Toronto's anti-Semitic encampment. And this is what they have on their website. So you can, there's about 120 faculty at the University of Toronto.
We have friends on there.
Yeah, well, I have friends on there.
Yes.
And you can go on there. They have thousands of academics in North America on there. And you can go in and you can sort by university or organization, or they have state, but you can sort by country or by university. So if you want to see everybody at Queens who's on there, or everybody at U of T, and they provide all sorts of information about those people. So it's to put them out there, and once they get listed here, they often then start getting hate mail, they start getting nasty things posted on X or Facebook or wherever. Another part of the minefield that really blew a lot of things up were the protest encampments that you're all aware of, that sprung up last year, or this year actually. And I want to walk you through, these are the universities that I know of where there were encampments in Canada. There were protests and other kinds of things, where there are actual encampments. These are the ones that I know. Now, what's interesting is they have very different histories. And this raises some fundamental free expression and freedom of assembly issues. Some lasted for 60, 70 days. Some lasted less than 24 hours. So the ones where the university called in the police and the police came in and shut them down right away were Calgary, Alberta, Laval, and York. So there was no opportunity to express themselves, to assemble. The police came down, and it was often quite heavy-handed. These are some images of the police coming on campus at the University of Alberta. And these are images of what happened at the University of Calgary. And all of us wondered why those two universities had the police come in immediately. And the rumor, and it's not a conspiracy theory because it's actually from fairly reliable sources, is that Premier Daniel Smith phoned the two university presidents the night before and said, unless those encampments are shut down within 24 hours, your universities are going to suffer serious financial penalties. Now, the presidents have adamantly denied that. They justified calling in the police. In these cases, the police were particularly violent. There were a number of people injured. Right now, our center is working with students and lawyers for both those campuses to launch a charter challenge against what the university did and the way to shut them down. I'll talk more about the charter and how that applies. Now, there were two other universities where the police did come in. One was McGill, and one was at Memorial. And the story at McGill is an interesting one. I have it here. Where is it? Sorry. wanted to check, because McGill did everything it could to stop the. I don't have. No, I don't. So, I mean, McGill said when it first went up, it has to be taken down. They wanted the police to come in. The police declined to come in. And for any of us my age who remember the Montreal police, that seemed a strange thing for them to say, no, we have to have evidence of wrongdoing. If it's just a matter of they're on your property, you don't like them on their property, that's your problem, not our problem, unless you get a court injunction. So they refused to come in. And the university pressed them on this matter to no avail. Oh, sorry, here it is. So it started on April 17th, or 27th. On the 29th, the encampment tripled in size in 2 days. The university made a statement, you have no right to be here. The administration sent out a memo that they had seen video evidence of some people, quote, using anti-Semitic language and intimidating behavior. The university president demanded that the encampment be removed, that it had become unsafe, that it was unsafe with hateful rhetoric being flagrantly used. Now, I'm giving you some of this detail because later on, there's different accounts of this. And then 2 McGill students launched their own request for an injunction, saying that protest had to be moved to at least 100 meters from the campus. The next day, the judge in the Montreal court rejected this, saying there was insufficient evidence of urgency or danger to students accessing any McGill buildings. The president of the university demanded the encampment be removed, that was not negotiable, but he would enter into a discussion to hear what the students had to say, but he wasn't prepared to negotiate with them. The Montreal police then received a request for assistance. The premier of the province the next day announced that that the encampment was illegal and the police must move in and remove it. It was reported also that day that McGill had instructed security to stop the accessibility and the movement of provision of basic necessities like porta potties or COVID masks. It went on, police didn't come in, it said no. So McGill filed for an injunction to have the police come in. And 3 days later, they went to court. And 2 days after that, the court ruled that their request was ill-founded. There was no basis of illegal behavior going on the campus and declined their request for an injunction. Then 2 days later, McGill filed for a second injunction. The McGill president wrote an op-ed saying that the encampment was not peaceful and that there was unlawful behavior going on. And nothing happened in the sense that the police still didn't come in. And then some students occupied one of the McGill administration buildings. Police came in immediately, arrested them, removed them, but did nothing with regard to the encampment. Finally, in July, McGill hired private security guards to come in and remove the encampment and had the police be there to make sure that there was no problem. So it was removed forcibly. So unlike Alberta and Laval and York and Calgary, there was this period from April to July where the encampment was placed, and McGill could not get the legal authorities to intervene. So they had to actually hire private security guards and then get the police to make sure the security guards weren't harmed. And there's the police standing around while the security firm they hired in. I'm a labor historian, so I remember the Pinkertons. So it was a private firm like that that came in and did the dirty work, and the police were there to back them up. Now, there was another one that was shut down at the University of Waterloo. The university filed for an injunction, and part of their filing was that the students would have to pay $1.5 million in costs. And that was so intense. I mean, the students had no possible way of doing that. And so they actually had to settle and remove and move because they could lose that lawsuit. And if they did lose it, they had no way of handling those kinds of costs. So the university promised if you accept the deal, if you remove yourself, we'll withdraw the demand for costs and we'll take no disciplinary action against any of the students who were in the encampment. And so they declared victory and left under duress. There were 3 universities where there were genuine negotiations with the administration: Windsor, University of Quebec Montreal, and McMaster. Especially the 2 English Canadian universities, McMaster and Windsor, there was enormous blowback from various alumni, various faculty, and various members of the community for the university president having given in to the students. It was so bad at the University of Windsor that the president had to go on medical leave and then announced that he was retiring from his presidency. The director of human rights at the university also had to go on medical leave. The pressure from those who were outraged that they had reached a settlement to deal with the demands of the students was so great that the life just was unbearable. And then finally, there were 2 that were shut by injunction. That is, there were injunctions filed that were granted by the court, and they specified a time when the students had to be out or the students would come in. And I'll talk about the one at Toronto. Our center was allowed by the court to be an intervener in both those cases. Also, at the same time, there was a lot of objection to student letters and statements. And you may have heard some of this. Some had a fairly high profile in the media. One was at the law school at my university, where 74 students signed a letter that said, it began, and this is an example of why they're students and they're there to learn, because this is not how you persuade people. Israel is not a country. It is a brand of settler colony. And they argued the mass attack on October 7th was, quote, a direct result of Israel's 75-year-long systemic campaign to eradicate Palestinians, and that Israel is therefore responsible for all the loss of life in Palestine, end quote. There would be no death if it were not for Israel's apartheid regime, the letter said. They did also describe the Hamas attack on October 7th as, quote, war crimes, unquote, while condemning, quote, any organization that only condemned Hamas. Hamas's recent war crimes, killing 1,300 Israelis, but have been and or remain silent on historic and ongoing war crimes committed by Israel. So that was the essence of their statement. The roof fell in on the university and on the students. There was $1 million donation that was supposed to come in that the donor pulled back. There were a number of donors who had prescribed scholarships for students in the law faculty who withdrew their support for the scholarships. There were a number of law firms in Toronto that dismissed any of the TMU students that were currently in placements in their law firms. Several stated they would not in future hire TMU law graduates. B'nai B'rith put out a press release calling on the school, quote, to expel terrorist apologist students, end quote. Some members of the legal community advocated for blacklisting all TMU students from the profession. So as a result of, a 22-year-old signing a statement, they can never work as a lawyer the rest of their lives. The Ontario Ministry of the Attorney General began requiring TMU law students who have, quote, current or upcoming employment opportunities with the ministry, and a lot of them do their placements there, that they had to sign an attestation affirming that they did not participate in the open letter, and further that, quote, false reporting on this attestation may be subject to either a revocation of any job offer made to me or discipline up to and including dismissal from employment from the Ministry of the Attorney General, as the case may be. Now, TMU, the president, who I know quite well and think very highly of, was really concerned for the students. It wasn't the most politic letter to have written, and it was inflammatory in that context. And the question is, was it legal speech? Was it? So he he took a step that I actually didn't think was a good idea, but turned out to be a very good idea. He arranged for the retired Chief Justice of Nova Scotia to do a very detailed independent inquiry as to whether the statement that was written, signed, and circulated by the students in the TMU's Lincoln Alexander School of Law breached the university policy on a student code of non-academic conduct. And if it did, what would be the appropriate sanctions? So you had all these demands, these students be expelled, other demands that they never be hired, and so forth. So he had Justice McDonald do a very lengthy, detailed survey, and I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, there were also problems at University of Toronto, Mississauga, and at York. The York Federation of Students, along with two other student unions in York, released a solidarity with Palestine statement in October, which drew attention to Israel's bombing of residential neighborhoods, use of white phosphorus bombs, denials of food, water, power, and medical supplies to Gaza's civilian population, and as well as York University's investment in weapons and arms manufacturing. York responded immediately, demanding a full retraction of public statement that the unions do not endorse or support anti-Semitism, and the immediate resignation of all student union executives involved. The university also initiated a process that could lead to decertification of student union. A similar letter was put out by the University of Toronto and Mississauga Student Association. And subsequent to that, the Ontario Minister of Colleges and Universities stood up in the Ontario legislature and said, quote, "Today, Speaker, I call upon York University and the University of Toronto, Mississauga to investigate and, if necessary, bring non-academic misconduct reviews regarding the actions of the executives of both respective unions for their statements. The students on the executive who signed the letters are," and I'm going to name the students because I think it's important that their names are enhancing. And so she named all of them. And then she went on to name individual professors at both universities who allegedly were supportive of what the students thought. So it's sort of an unprecedented response. Now, I'm going to give you two other examples of how toxic the environment had become and the kinds of penalties that people had to pay. The one is at the University of Alberta. It has a sexual assault center, which deals with women who are in abusive relationships or have been subject to sexual violence and provides assistance. They had a director who was a senior academic, although she was called a professional officer. And it had several staff, and then it had a host of volunteers who would work with the clients. The head of the center, the head of the center signed a statement that had been put out for signatures by Sarah Jama, who was a MPP in Toronto, or in Ontario. Yeah, she was actually my own, you're right. That called for a ceasefire and also said that the reports of the massive amount of sexual assaults on women by Hamas hadn't yet been verified. So it said those two things. The president of the university immediately fired her for signing that and justified the firing, saying, well, she signed it with her name and her name's Samantha Pearson, director, University of Alberta Sexual Assault Center. They fired her for using the university's name in identifying herself, claiming that implied she was speaking for the university. Then the university directed the staff there not to talk with each other, not to see any other clients, and to dismiss the whole raft of volunteers that did the work with the clients. And they were not to have any interaction with each other. The staff felt that was unethical, given some of these women were in violent situations they were helping them get out of. But this was not something that would just be put on hold. The university appointed some bureaucrat in the university who had no male bureaucrat who had no experience in anything to be the nominal interim director, but they had no staff and no volunteers. And they were taking no new cases. But the staff didn't feel it was ethical to just say to the women they were helping, sorry, we can't do anything. So they opened up an account on Signal so they could communicate with each other and see who was looking after whom, and would talk to some of the volunteers that way. The university learned of this, undertook an investigation, which went on for a month or so, and found that they had set up this, what I just described to you, and fired all of them. Now, the only note that's particularly interesting in all of that is the academic freedom language in the collective agreement at the University of Alberta. And at the University of Alberta, you know, as in all universities in Alberta, everyone who's deemed an academic staff person, which means faculty members, professional officers, research assistants, and so on, are members of the Faculty Association by Post-Secondary Learning Act. So anybody that the university hires as an academic staff, broadly understood, is automatically a member of the Faculty Association, which is unionized, and they have a collective agreement. And in their academic freedom language, it says, in the exercise of extramural critique, staff members shall not purport to speak on behalf of the university unless so authorized. An indication of affiliation with the university should not be construed as speaking on behalf of the university. So when we raise this with the president, he says, yes, but you have to read down further. This article, so what they have is a master agreement and then a separate agreement for each of the constituencies. There's the academic faculty constituency, the sessional constituency, and so forth. And the professional officers, which she was in, is the one that's excluded from this provision of the collective agreement. So even though agreed in principle that we can't do this, because it wasn't in writing, which speaks to the importance of collective agreements. Anyways, one other quick example. This is a picture of Nipissing University, building at Nipissing University, where the students run an equity center. Let's get my notes here. I had a call from a student. Sorry. I don't remember. A student called me saying, I was the executive director of the student center. So this equity center, unlike the one in Alberta, was run by students. It was paid for out of student fees. And it was to be a place for equity deserving groups at the university to hang out, and it did educational things around a variety of issues. And it ran a campaign on anti-Semitism. And the nature of the campaign was anti-Israel, it's not anti-Semitic. And it had about 8 slides. This is one of them. Why is the Israeli government leading the genocide of Palestinians? We wish we had the answer. We must not forget, though, that there's a difference between individuals and their state. You can critique the Israeli Defense Force, government, and state. You should. It is also important to consider the fact that many Israeli people don't support the IDF or possess Zionist views. There's a difference between being anti-Zionist and being anti-Semitic. Western powers such as Canada and the US should be critiqued as well because of their inaction, etc. And so they were trying to draw a distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. And much of their description of anti-Semitism and the rest of it was fine. It just wasn't accepting the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. So a graduate student at Nipissing, who was a former member of the Israeli Defense Force, filed a complaint with the university saying that this campaign by this center violated the university's respectful workplace policy. The university hired a third-party investigator who spent a month or so investigating and concluded, yes, it did, claiming that it did so because statements like this constituted harassment under Ontario human rights law. Now, One of my colleagues in the Senate is the former vice chair of the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, said that's 100% bullshit. He's completely wrong. But anyways, that was the finding. And then the student who contacted me, who was the executive director, received the following disciplinary letter, in which they reported that they were having this investigation. She had been found guilty of violating the respectful workplace policy, and therefore the following discipline was applied to be applied. One, the requirement to complete the Yad Vashem course entitled Anti-Semitism from its origins to the present, which is available free on Coursera. Now, this is a course that the core part of it is how criticism of Israel is anti-Semitism. Okay, you had to complete that. Secondly, a requirement to write a reflection after completion of the course. The reflection should consider how the anti-Israel, not anti-Semitic campaign inaccurately reflected anti-Semitism, considering the new information you have learned from this investigation and the completion of the required course. The reflection should also consider the findings of the investigation, your accountability in the situation, the impact of your action on a student and the larger Nipissing University community, and what could be done differently in the future. The reflection is to be no less than 2 full pages in length and 12-point type with 1-inch margins and single spacing. The reflection is to be submitted to the Office of the Assistant Vice President of Students by December 4th. 3, a requirement that effective immediately you no longer serve on or inform decision-making for student groups funded by ancillary funds for a period of 1 year. Continue.
What happens if her reflection says?
Wait, I'm getting
You're getting to that.
Failure to comply with the requirements set out above will result in suspension from the university for a period of 1 year. If after 1 year suspension you are still non-compliant, the Vice President Academic of the province may decide if it is appropriate to convert the suspension into an expulsion. Should the reflection not be completed in a satisfactory way, a notation may be added to your transcript for non-academic misconduct. Now, under their rules, there was I was telling her, there's a right to appeal. Maybe. That is, you have a right to request the provost, who's the decision maker here, to allow you to appeal the decision to him. And so we arranged for her to have a lawyer to help her do that, and she's still waiting. She had a meeting next week to find out if they're going to allow her to appeal. And the reason that she's going to appeal, I mean, we don't expect much justice in this kind of court situation, is we're going to judicial review, because it's quite clearly a process that's unacceptable. I can't imagine a court being able. But I just wanted to give you, I'm just picking 2 of those examples. I'll give you another dozen of the kinds of things that are going on. Now, you know, there were a lot of claims about what was happening in encampments, what was happening at TMU. We have 2 cases where actual respectable legal authorities looked into it to say what actually they saw happening. And I thought I would share those with you if I may. The TMU report that was written by Mr. Justice McDonald was entitled Strengthening the Pillars Report of the TMU External Review. So he answered some questions. Once they were a breach of the code, I have concluded the students' participation in the letter, while damaging and hurtful, was nonetheless saved from sanction as representing a valid exercise of their academic their freedom of expression in accordance with the university statement of freedom of expression. He goes on. Was the letter anti-Semitic? After researching the issue and receiving varied submissions on the point, I am of the view that the letter should not have been characterized as anti-Semitic. There is no universally accepted definition of anti-Semitism, but as discussed, this external review has understood anti-Semitism as the manifestation and expression of discrimination against Jewish people. It is accepted that the participants intended the letter to criticize the historical treatment of Palestine and Palestinians and Israel's past and present military efforts, not to criticize Judaism or Jewish people more generally. The letter does not refer to Jewish people or Judaism, nor does it explicitly or implicitly equate Israel's actions with those of the Jewish people. whose views do not necessarily or universally align with those of the state of Israel. Furthermore, the letter does not refer to Zionism. So despite all the claims and by lawyers and so on, I mean, this is how the Chief Justice, looking through a mountain of material, and he spent 2 months, had a team of lawyers working with them, concluded. Now, he also had advice from the legal community, which is surprising. I was quite surprised he was willing to do this because it's not something that increases your popularity amongst your colleagues. The lawyers who fueled the backlash against the responding students displayed the same kind of response for which they have criticized the students, using insensitive and harsh words, rushing to judgment, and not acknowledging opposing viewpoints. They have talked about the importance of civility and respectful dialogue without extending their empathetic sentiments to the students involved. We encourage them going forward to apply their experience and wisdom in ways that support the Lincoln Alexander School of Law students, whether through mentorship opportunities, placements, or longer-term positions. So it's quite surprising that he would have done that. I mean, he knew he was going to pay a price for doing that. Now, the next one I want to take you to is the injunction at the University of Toronto. When it went before the court, the university had maintained claims that it would, when you call for an injunction, you have to talk about how you were harmed. Okay, so at Vancouver Island, when they talked about harm simply by them not having control of the space, they didn't make allegations about anti-Semitism or violence or anything. They just said, this is our space, we lost control of it, and we have a right to control it. It's our private property, and therefore you have to order it out. The Toronto injunction said that, but also said that there was anti-Semitism, there was violence, and the harm that was being caused by this encampment. So the judge looked at this, and his decision, which I'm unhappy with, I'll tell you about that, in terms of saying property rights trumps freedom of expression. Nevertheless, went out of his way to say the university has not made a strong prima facie case to show that the encampment is violent. The record before me shows that apart from the initial seizing and the continuing exclusion of people from the front campus, which is King's College Circle, the encampment itself is peaceful. While there is some evidence of physical altercations outside the encampment, there is no evidence that any of the named respondents or other encampment occupants are associated with those incidents. Then he went on to talk about, and those are the key things. Then he goes on to talk about anti-Semitism. The university has not made out a strong prima facie case to show that the encampment is anti-Semitic. Although there have clearly been instances of anti-Semitic hate speech outside the encampment, there is no evidence that the named respondents or encampment occupants are associated with any of those instances. The encampment itself has people of various backgrounds, including Muslim and Jews, conducts weekly Shabbats involving Jews and Muslims. Both Jewish and Muslim members of the encampment have testified about its inclusive, peaceful nature. So, there's lots of claims, and if you talk to people generally about what went on, there's still a strong view there was violence, there was anti-Semitism. But the court, looking at all the evidence the University of Toronto provided, could find no evidence of violence. So then it raises the question, well, what should we do about all this? And I just wanted to share a few thoughts with you about that in ending. Sorry. I figured no scrambled when I was upset on the train looking at this up. So all the work that our center does grows out of a view that democracy is fundamentally founded on an ongoing public discourse about what's legitimate and what's not legitimate. A discourse that cannot be brought to an end by a majority. Majority can pass law, a government can be elected, even though it doesn't have a majority to be elected, as our current Ford government can bicycle lanes, you can do whatever it wants. And we have to obey the law, but we never lose our right to protest to try to change it. So our jurisprudence recognizes that, and recognizes in particular that the most valuable speech protected by freedom of expression generally is political speech. And these are two decisions of the Supreme Court of Canada that make reference to. One is in Libin versus Quebec. Political expression is at the very heart of the values sought to be protected by freedom of expression. Or more recently in Harper versus Canada, yes, Stephen political expression lies at the heart of the guarantee of free expression and underpins the very foundation of our democracy. So the record in our country of what kinds of restrictions can be, for any restrictions on anything that's political, it has to be a very high bar before courts will warrant or allow restriction of that. But then the question comes up, well, does that matter at all? I mentioned earlier about the charter applying. Does that matter at all? After all, there was the McKinney decision of the Supreme Court in 1990, where some faculty members at the University of British Columbia who were being forced to retire at 65 because of the university's mandatory retirement policy said this is a violation of our charter rights. And that case went all the way to the Supreme Court. And Mr. Justice LaForest, who was a former dean of law, wrote the decision saying, no, it does not violate your charter rights. That is, that decision to have mandatory retirement was a decision of the university. And the charter only applies to actions of the government or actions by non-governmental bodies that are at the direction of the government. And insofar as that policy was decided by the board of the university, and there was no pressure from government one way or another on the issue, the charter does not apply. Now that decision for several decades has been read to mean the charter just does not apply to universities. And he talked about the importance of university autonomy and why they're very reluctant to bring to treat anything the university does as an action of government. So, and then the Alberta Court of Appeal, in several decisions in the last decade or so, have determined that in disciplining students, the University of Alberta and the University of Calgary, these are the two cases, because of the way the Universities Act of BC is written, have an obligation to treat students in a manner compliant with the charter. In one case, pro-life students put up a huge series of images on both sides of the walk into one of the main classroom buildings. And the university ordered them to take them down, or actually to turn them around, saying, well, you can express yourself, but you can't do it in a way people have to look at it. So you have to turn all those things around, so face away, so nobody has to see it. And they went to court and went all the way to the Alberta Court of Appeal. The Alberta Court of Appeal found for the students, saying, no, they have the right to, you don't have to look at it, but they have a right to have it there. And the university, insofar as it's dealing with student issues of that sort, does have to comply with the charter. In Ontario is the other province where arguably universities have to comply with the charter in dealing with issues of freedom of expression. And that's because in August of 2018, Doug Ford sent out a directive in August of that year to all universities in Ontario, saying that each of your universities have to develop before the end of December this year a policy on freedom of expression that's consistent with the policy at the University of Chicago. Now, the University of Chicago policy, which is sometimes referred to as the Chicago Principles, is actually a very good statement on freedom of expression. And so he ordered all universities to do that and said, you can suffer penalties if you fail to do that. We're going to have the Higher Education Quality Control Council of Ontario review your policies to make sure they're consistent with the University of Chicago policy. And furthermore, we're going to have HECO each year in September review how you've lived up to those policies to assure you have. Now, Doug Ford, in my view, is no champion of free expression. Right? He thought this is the way to get the universities. I mean, he had the notion, well, they discriminate against conservative speech, so I might teach him a lesson, right? But now, because he's done that, arguably, the universities, in relation to policies on freedom of expression and actions with regard to freedom of expression, actually are acting at the behest of government. This government is directed how the policy has to be. Now, we haven't had a case going forward to test this in court. We're just waiting for one. The injunction case, the lawyers for the students who filed the injunction, they were very good lawyers, did not fulfill the procedural requirements that are necessary if you're going to raise the charter. You're going to raise it, and if you have a case that you're bringing forward at any level of court, and you're going to claim that the actions of the party you're contesting with violated the charter, you have to engage in pretty elaborate requirements. You have to notify the attorneys general of all the provinces and of Canada that you're going to raise charter issues, so they have a right to intervene and so forth. They did none of that. So the judge they couldn't raise the charter issue. The judge couldn't deal with it. The particular judge who handled this, who's quite a good judge, nevertheless felt that he needed to address it. So while it's not part of his decision, it's sort of over. He said, well, but even if they had been able to raise the charter, it wouldn't apply. Now, if it had been over, we had gone to judicial review and probably won. But if it had been part of his decision. So we don't have any firm standing up, but it's pretty clear that we more than meet the requirements for a non-governmental body. Being funded by government is not enough to bring under the charter. You have to be acting at the behest of government in relation to a certain thing. Anyways, so what's clear is that we have to, going forward, we have to assist our universities act in a manner consistent with our commitments as a country to freedom of expression and freedom of assembly. The charter, in all its various clauses, has only 4 things that it identifies as fundamental freedom. And they're in section 2 of the charter: freedom of religion and conscience, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and freedom of association. Okay, so there's that reason why some of the actions of the universities in trying to sort their way through this minefield have lost sight of their obligation to act in a way consistent with the charter. But we also should look at university policies, and actually, I think the best policy statement in all of this, doesn't mean they live up to it, that's why academic freedom language, which is enforceable, is important, is at the University of Toronto. This was a statement of purpose of the university written in 1992, that I think is wonderful. The University of Toronto is dedicated to fostering an academic community in which the learning and scholarship of every member may flourish, with vigilant protection for individual human rights, and a resolute commitment to the principles of equal opportunity, equity, and justice. Within the unique university context, the most crucial of all human rights are the right to freedom of speech, academic freedom, and freedom of research. And we affirm that these rights are meaningless unless they entail the right to raise deeply disturbing questions and provocative challenges to the cherished beliefs of society at large and of the university itself. And this human right to radical critical teaching and research is which the university has the duty above all to be concerned, for there is no one else, no other institution, no other office in our modern liberal democracy, which is the custodian of this most precious and vulnerable right of the liberated human spirit. So, the context in which it says this would have suggested they might behave differently than they did. And as I say, that's why one thing to have policies. I wish other universities had a policy was clear, but it's not enforceable. And that's where the academic freedom language and collective agreements. And in Canada, 97% of all university faculty are unionized. And 4 universities aren't: Toronto, Waterloo, McMaster, and McGill. And Toronto and Waterloo have collective agreement like memoranda or other things that can be agreed